Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 129 of Sports Speak. Hope you're doing well. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
A fun show for you today. It's our Major League Baseball 2023 season preview. Just a couple minutes, Zoe Alter is going to be joining us. We're going to break down the Mets, the Yankees, and give our picks for the playoffs. And of course, we'll have everything on social media after the fact. And then Hayley Galindo is going to join us later on, talk about the World Baseball Classic. Me and her definitely have some differing opinions on it, so we'll debate that later. And I can also plug that episode 130, which will be dropping next week. We're going to be joined by kind of the internet hero of March Madness so far, Jordan Sarnoff, the SID for Fairleigh Dickinson. Tim and I both went to broadcasting camp with him, and now he's gone viral for his work as a student working for FDU who had that impressive upset in March Madness over Purdue. So we're going to talk some March Madness and have him on next week. This show's going to be baseball focused, except for the beginning right here, because I want to talk a little NASCAR for a moment, because this weekend, racing Circuit of the Americas, and we see a stacked field of road course ringers. Jordan Taylor filling in for Chase Elliott. Got Jenson Button out there. Kimi Räikkönen, Connor Daly back making a start as well. It's a loaded field. Jimmy Johnson's also attempting the race for Legacy Motor Club. And I really think NASCAR has had its negatives to start the season. Atlanta is a big problem. NASCAR should not have reconfigured that track and turning it into a super speedway. But take the positives when you can get them. COTA, I really think we're seeing with the next-gen car, people from different backgrounds who are done racing full-time in those other series from all around the world are willing to give NASCAR a try. And I spoke with Austin Cindric this week for my other show, and he said, hopefully this leads to maybe a point where we see some of these world champion drivers wanting to try an oval besides Daytona. Try something that the NASCAR drivers are comfortable with, and I could see that happening. You've got Helio Castroneves with superstar racing experience running these short tracks in the late model cars. Maybe someone like that would want to try an oval race, but I think NASCAR has to take this as a huge positive here, that after a stretch of years with the charter system where you saw drivers from other series not wanting to come over and try NASCAR Cup races, the schedule is interesting enough and the car is fun enough to drive that people actually want to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. People want to come back. And I think the big thing, too, for me is, in COTA in particular, it's of the road courses we'll go to this season, arguably one of the best for the next gens, just because of the fact that there's so many, high to low speed breaking points, creating opportunities to pass. I mean, think about the COTA race last year, where there was just so much chaos. Of course, the first season's COTA race had all the rain, and that was scary. But last season, had such good racing and had such a good end. Ross Chastain gets his first career win. And you look at going into this week, where you come off a bad week in Atlanta, you kind of get that good positive vibe this week that it's going to be such a good racing weekend. And to see, like you guys mentioned, like Kimi Räikkönen being on the track, and getting more of a global influence, I think is, to me, such a massive first step. And I actually agree with what you talked about with Austin Cindric as well, in regards to the fact that, you hope there's that temptation to eventually get these guys on the oval. And I truthfully think the way, for example, Trackhouse Racing is instituting their program, and I hope other teams continue to follow this direction, by, not exactly having a part-time car, but, maybe having one-off opportunities, even if you're a lower funded team, just to give these guys a chance, to get some seat time, get a little bit of comfort in a NASCAR before they adapt to other levels. And, I'll say it like this: Jimmy Johnson, of course, seven-time NASCAR champion. I'll give him credit in this regard. I'm not saying that he by means is, breaking barriers, because of course there's plenty of Indy car drivers before him that made the opposite transition. Of course, Juan Pablo Montoya through F1 and everything, just an example, Dario Franchitti, another. But my point is simply this, is that, Jimmy Johnson, give him credit, at the end of his career, turned around and said, hey, I want to try something different. I want to have fun. And I think it's big for a lot of these superstars in racing today to, really grow the sport of racing, not just the sport they're in. So to me, for NASCAR to have the opportunity to grow and maybe get these opportunities for these guys to get a little bit comfortable so they can adapt to the facets of racing oval and maybe, they find a knack for it and, develop another full-time career. I think that's a great thing for the sport and it only promotes further things growing. And I will say this too, Eddie, not just this weekend in general, but what you do have to give NASCAR more credit for more than anything else. Granted, I know the tough times of, these adapting racetracks and questionable decisions. NASCAR has done such a good job of growing its diversity program, growing its international program, and trying to get involvement from other countries around the world and some of the top superstars in the world. And when you get a weekend like this, really for the first time this year, because the Daytona 500 is the Daytona 500, but here at COTA, you get the first true sense of people coming from all around the world coming to race. So to me, I think this is a big milestone, to be honest with you. And I just have to applaud NASCAR in that regard, that this is what you need if you want to continue to grow the sport, not just from a fan perspective, but an involvement perspective moving forward.
100%. So we're going to move forwards now. We're going to move to baseball. That's the focus of this episode. And Zoe Alter is going to be joining us now for our 2023 Major League Baseball season preview. Let's focus on Major League Baseball. What I'll just say about the WBC, because we're going to have to start with the Mets, I'll just leave it at this. The WBC, I think, should happen based on social media engagement and the players liking it. It should not happen 2 weeks before Major League Baseball starts. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll get into that more with Hayley. But of course, the Mets now are without Edwin Diaz for the season. The bullpen is going to be piecemeal. They're relying on 2 older starters. Plus, you have Alonso, McNeil, Lindor. You've got pieces, but not many additions on offense. And the Mets are really just hoping they can sort of run it back like they did last year, except not collapse. But I'll be honest, and then Zoe, I'll go to you. We were talking off the air. We're both worried about this team. I didn't see them as a team that could win the World Series going before the Diaz injury. Now, to me, they look like an NLDS exit. They look like a team that could get there, that could maybe win the NL East, but I don't see them winning a playoff series with the current roster construction.
Eddie, I don't even think I see them winning the NL East. I mean, maybe if they were in any other division in baseball, other than maybe the AL East, but in the NL East, that's going to be so tough. Like, in order for the Mets to compete there, they're going to need every weapon they have. And without Diaz, I don't even know what I see out of this Mets team. Diaz got the Mets out of so many situations last year that they would have lost those games. And we know at the end of the year, it came down to like the wire with those games. So for me, I think it's going to be really rocky. I mean, I know the Mets have the offense, but there are some pieces that like you and I as Mets fans really wanted to see brought in and weren't brought in, but we know Steve Cohen has the money to bring in, but no one else was brought in. I mean, trades fell through. We saw that happen, things like that. I think I'm worried. I also get worried every time I see Pete Alonso in the World Baseball Classic because he sucks there. And I know he just can't hit to save his life there, but it freaks me out because you come into the season with like probably your best hitter who comes in and can't hit a ball in the World Baseball Classic. That doesn't feel good to see. And you're worried, what's he going to do in the MLB? And I know he's going to be better, but I don't know how much better. So for me, I'm on the same page. I have a lot of doubts. Also, I know we didn't really have Jacob deGrom last year, but I'm still stressed. I'm stressed about Verlander getting hurt. I mean, the Mets seem to have injury woes all over the place. So if another starting pitcher goes down, I don't even know what we can expect from the Mets anymore. We need to make some pitcher signing if that happens, but a lot of people are off the market, and I'm just overall stressed. Alvarez has looked really bad in preseason, which has also stressed me out because
he's not even going to be on the Major League roster to start the year.
No, exactly. Like they had to put him down into lower leagues. So I don't even know what to expect right now. I'm very, very hesitant. Normally when we go into a Mets season, I'm a little too optimistic, but this season I think I might be a little too pessimistic, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Now the trend with this is the 4th year we've done a baseball preview. The trend has been Tim is higher on the Mets than I am, and I'm higher on the Yankees than he is because we both know our teams and that they usually suck and suffer late in the season. But here's my problems with the Mets, and then Tim, you can jump in here. Like Zoe just mentioned, I think Alonso could be in a funk coming out. He did get a home run today in spring training, but I don't care about spring training. You know what? There are people that are pitching. Teams are not trying. You have guys who are definitely not going to be on the Major League roster on the mound and at the plate. So statistics in the spring does not matter to me at all. So the Mets having to send down Francisco Alvarez, I'm not shocked, but I think there is a concern. I really hope they keep Brett Baty up because he's been hitting very well in the spring and he looked good last year before he injured his wrist. So I'd like him to be a part of the roster. But my whole thing is this. The Mets fell short last year. They had a good season and then crumbled in September, just like how Rutgers basketball just crumbled last month. That's any team I root for. That's all that happens now. It just collapses as the season goes on. The Mets did not do much to get better and prevent that because their offense is basically the same, give or take a couple of pieces. And if you're completely honest here, the rotation is not that different. The only thing is that Verlander historically and based on last season can pitch more innings than Jacob deGrom. But Verlander is also older. I do trust Verlander more giving the Mets consistency for 6 months, but in a single game still, I'd take Jacob deGrom over Justin Verlander. But sure, Verlander replaces deGrom. You can't be hyping up Kodai Senga that much because there is the potential that he's a letdown. We've seen a lot of players from Japan come over and not be able to cut it in Major League Baseball. We've seen other ones exceed expectations. But Senga, I hope he works out. But I think it's relatively realistic to put him at the same caliber as Chris Bassett. Then in the end, the Mets did not improve at all. And oh, by the way, they do not have their closer. Adam Ottavino or David Robertson is going to be closing games for this team. So they have a lackluster bullpen, a rotation that was good last year, but it's not that much better. And the offense is the same players. So I still think there's potential to win the NL East now that Hoskins is out and Harper's missing the beginning of the season for the Phillies, and they still don't have great pitching besides the top two. And the Braves, I think, got worse this offseason, but I don't see the Mets going much further. And like I said, Tim, I see them as an NLDS exit.
Well, I agree with you. I have the New York Mets as an NLDS exit this year. And for the record, I don't have them winning the NL East. But to be fair, I also think that obviously with Philadelphia making the World Series last year, there's this positive mindset about the Phillies, about the future, considering they signed guys like Trey Turner to try to build this roster to get stronger. And yet it still reminds me to the fact that this team won, 80 games last season, was barely above 500, fired their manager in the middle of the year. So it's like for the Phillies to do all this in this offseason, if they don't perform this season to a better expectation and maybe even be a triple-digit win team, it's going to be a letdown, to be truthfully honest with you. And I feel like they're obviously top competitors up there to win the NL East along with the New York Mets, but the NL East isn't getting easier. It's not getting easier at all. The Braves are the Braves. They're going to continue to play consistent baseball. They're getting their, pitchers back healthy too, which is a big thing. So I feel for the Mets to say it like this, Eddie, to be honest with you. The New York Yankees problem. I truthfully mean it. Think about it. What has been my big gripe for the last 3 seasons about the New York Yankees? It's never been about the pitching. It's been about bettering the offense, the aspect of consistency. And I'm not saying that Steve Cohen is, complacent by any means. But the New York Mets problem last season was that they couldn't hit when it mattered, when it meant most. And sure, Steve Cohen going into last season made huge acquisitions and tried to better this team, and it rightfully so did better this team. But pitching wasn't the problem last year. Yeah, you bettered the rotation. I think Senga's going to be a lot better than what you think he's going to be. I think Justin Verlander is going to be Justin Verlander, and this Mets starting rotation is going to be dominant. And to be honest with you, I don't think the bullpen is going to be as bad as what you think it's going to be, despite Edwin Diaz disappearing for the season. But the true answer is the offense is still the same old offense. Yeah, they're going to hit great for average throughout the season. They're going to put some great offensive numbers. You can't hit when it matters most. That's what concerns me. And that's the problem with the New York Yankees. And to be honest with you, again, unless they get active with trades, which I'm sure Steve Cohen will do as the season goes on, I see the Mets falling the same fate as the Yankees of they're not going to hit when it matters in the postseason, and which is why I don't see them really going far this year in terms of competing for a World Series.
So let's shift to the Yankees now. I'll let Tim finish with the Yankees because we know he's going to have a lot to say. First off, Anthony Volpe better be on that major league roster opening day for the New York Yankees and get a starting position. He is the real deal. He proved it in the minors, and he's proved it this spring that he belongs with the New York Yankees. And it would be really a disservice to him and the organization, in my opinion, to not have him in that lineup. The Yankees still have a lot in the farm system. Jason Dominguez, I'm working in Somerset this summer. I'll get to see him play. I know he's going to be a piece for the future for the Yankees, but let's look at the present. The Yankees last year swept by the Astros. Let's be honest, weren't really competitive with them, and were almost eliminated by the Cleveland Guardians, who barely made the playoffs. And at first it seemed like only got in because the AL Central was so bad. The Yankees also completely snake bitten by injuries from everybody Brian Cashman has tried to acquire in the last year or so. It's kind of like the Mets in a way. It's kind of flipped, I feel like, because the Mets are the team that's spending so much, but still finding ways to come up short because there's such talent that they have to play against. Whereas the Yankees are trying to make moves and piece a roster together, and everybody they think is going to work out gets hurt. So it's really a switch dynamic from what we saw maybe 8-10 years ago. But the Yankees, I would say right now, in my opinion, are in a better position to make a run to the World Series than the Mets are. Garrett Cole proved he can pitch in the playoffs last year, despite my criticisms of him. If Nestor Cortes is healthy, really the whole thing for the Yankees is starting rotation health at this point. You know your offense is going to be at least decently productive. There's going to be the albatrosses of, IKF and Josh Donaldson, and Yankee fans will freak out every time they see them in the lineup. But it'll be combated with the fact that Aaron Judge is still probably going to hit, at the very least, at the lower range, 35 to 40 home runs, even if he has an IL stint during the season. Stanton's going to be good. When Bader's back, he looked great last year, and the Yankees have a lot of young talent in the pipeline. But the rotation, you have Nestor Cortes, who, by the way, got hurt training for the WBC, Luis Severino, who is really the definition of injury prone, and then Carlos Rodon, who, guess what, missing the beginning of the season due to injury, and he's someone the Yankees paid a lot for, and I'll give Tim credit. He said that Carlos Rodon was going to be Frankie Montas 2.0. Guess what happens to both of them? They get hurt as soon as they're in pinstripes. So at this point for the Yankees, I think bullpen and then top of the line with the rotation. And of course, I'd say most of the offense I feel good about, but the rest of the rotation could be a real problem for the Yankees. And the AL East, once again, has some stacked lineups. Red Sox did make some good, albeit weird moves. Rays are always contenders, and Toronto is in the mix, and Baltimore's on the up. So it's not going to be easy for the Yankees. Not to mention, NL's got a lot of good lineups, and since this is our preview, we have to mention MLB rules have changed this year. You play every team. It's not just 19 games against your division. You only play 13 against your division. You play every team from the other league. The Yankees start against the Giants and the Phillies. So it's kind of crazy like that. But Zoe, looking at the Yankees after the way they got swept last year by the Astros and all these injuries, do you see them going further than the Mets? Where do you really see is their ceiling this year?
I mean, the problem is, like, when you compare them to the Mets, my hope for the Mets right now is very, very low. So, like, if I see them in comparison to the Mets, yes, I see them going further than the Mets. Do I see them, like, winning the World Series? No. I mean, personally, I don't even have them going to, like, the ALCS. So that's just my side of it. But I also then again have, like, the Red Sox as a sleeper team. So say what you want about that. But I just feel like, I mean, I've never been that high up on Aaron Judge. You guys know this. I don't think he's, like, the end all to, like, ever grace baseball. I mean, he's a guy. And I know he hit the home run record, but half the time when I see him, like, I see him as a guy who strikes out. Like, that's just how I see him. That's how I've always seen him. And I know he hits home runs too. But he had the best season he's ever had last year, right? He had this crazy season. He hit so many home runs. Do I see him replicating that again? Probably not. He's still going to hit a ton of home runs. I have no doubt about that. But even when he hit all these home runs and he was this star, they still got swept. These things still happen. So for me, do I see the Yankees really, really improving? No. But do I see them going further than the Mets? Yeah, I see them going further than the Mets.
All right. Well, Tim, the floor is yours.
I want to hear this so bad.
Yeah. How are you feeling about this team?
I feel like this is another 4-0 run in the ALCS where the Astros go to the World Series again. That's what I truly feel about the New York Yankees. I mean, I don't I was very vocal during the offseason, the fact that I didn't want pitching to be the answer in the offseason. I wanted a guy like Trey Turner. I wanted a guy, like Xander Bogaerts that could play the middle infield and turn this offense around. And unfortunately, the answer is we're not going to have that. The catching spot with Trevino looks, pretty decent. I'm going to be honest with you. Anthony Rizzo's looked horrific this, entire preseason. And I know that average doesn't really show stuff during spring training, but I'm a little bit concerned about Anthony Rizzo and the production you're going to see over the next, 2 years or whatever it is for the contract he signed. A lot of people are high on Peraza. I'm not high on Peraza. I've told you many times Oswaldo Cabrera is just a better hitting Tyler Wade for the New York Yankees. Anthony Volpe is going to be the difference maker for this offense, and I really hope he's on opening day. If he doesn't, the Yankees are doing a disservice to this organization and really the truthful desire to win anything. And while I would love to see Jason Dominguez, be on the opening day roster, realism is he's what? I don't even know. Is it 19, 20 now? It feels like he's been in the minor leagues forever at this point, since he's been signed. But he's still very young. He still needs a little bit more time. And I do hope, early on the season, he finds himself up on this major league roster. But the true answer to this all, to be honest with you, you mentioned Harrison Bader. When does he come back? What does he do? I have faith in Judge, being productive and being the soul of this offense. Being the captain is not a light thing to, take in New York. And I really do think he embraces that. And I'm glad he's the Yankees captain. But the Yankees right now, offensively, the fact that they face Brett Gardner dilemma all over again. And what I mean by that is the fact that, listen, yeah, you have Judge, you could play maybe Stanton out in the outfield, but with Bader being hurt, the fact of the matter is that Aaron Hicks is going to be your everyday center fielder, which is something that you do not want, in my opinion. And I don't even want him to make the roster, but we all know he's going to have to be in some shape or form. So realistically speaking, that's the reason why I push for a guy like Dominguez to be on the roster, but that's just not realistic. So I hope Bader comes back soon, but I just want Aaron Hicks DFA'd something. I don't want him on the Yankees roster. Until he's gone, that's when I truthfully think this team changes. But I am optimistic enough that this bullpen and pitching staff, despite injury, can produce a winning season and head back to an ALCS. But by God, this team is still not good enough to win a World Series. And to be honest with you, I'm really rooting for Brian Cashman's failure at this point because I cannot stand him being the New York Yankees GM any longer. You could say, yeah, the best GM we currently have available in New York, but the man has no clue what it's like to win a World Series. He accidentally won one in 2009, and he was handed the keys to the future when he first became the Yankee GM. He clearly has no touch in reality and constantly relies on failure. So I'll leave it with that. I just don't think the Yankees are going to win a World Series yet again this season. It's going to probably be the Astros playing some very good NL team, losing to them in the World Series.
Yeah, here's the deal for baseball, and we'll kind of shift now to some predictions. So first off, little disclaimer, I will have one of my silly fancy graphics out next week with our full predictions. We're going to stay away from the player picks in the show. We'll share those out on social media, but we're going to focus on like records and which teams are going to the NLCS, ALCS, and the World Series. So for me, it starts with this. There was not that much change this offseason compared to previous years. Most of the powers that be are going to stay the powers that be in both leagues, I think. I think one dynamic that's really going to change things is everybody plays everybody. The AL Central could be awful this year, and the NL Central to an extent for some of these teams as well, because now they don't get to beat up on each other as much. They lose out on 24 games they would have played in division. Now they have to play everybody, including all the best teams. The whole AL Central is going to have to play against the Dodgers and the Padres, the Mets, the Braves, the Phillies this year in at least one series. So that I think is going to make some of these bad divisions even worse. So I'm going to first throw out what Raheel had for us. He couldn't join us today. Shout out Raheel Jaswal, doing big things at Newhouse. But his picks were this. He had NL MVP as Trey Turner. I think self-explanatory given what Turner's done in the World Baseball Classic. Justin Verlander as NL Cy Young. Hey, he did win AL Cy Young last year. Jordan Walker for NL Rookie of the Year. Big prospect for the St. Louis Cardinals. AL MVP, Yordan Alvarez. AL Cy Young, Framber Valdez. AL Rookie of the Year, Anthony Volpe. He's got the Astros beating the Yankees in 5 in the ALCS. Padres over the Mets in 6 in the NLCS, and the Astros beating the Padres in the World Series in 6 games. So for me, let me start with my 2 surprises in the playoffs. I think people are severely underrating the Chicago Cubs. They made some big moves this offseason. They add Dansby Swanson. They didn't have all that bad of a year last year after completely gutting the 2016 roster. They're still well managed. They have a nice mix. They've got some good prospects on the up. And I think this is a year with the weak NL Central and some teams that have major flaws in both leagues that the Cubs could sneak into the playoff field. My AL surprise, the Angels, I think now, finally, the combo of Ohtani and Trout will be enough to push them over the edge to get into the postseason field. They were in that position the first 2 months of last year, then they collapsed, fired Madden, and everything went bad after that. I think this is the year you're going to also think about it. Ohtani's on a contract year. He's going to have an incredible season, in my opinion, both pitching and hitting. And little disclaimer, he is my AL MVP, but I think the Angels are going to get into the playoffs this year. So those are my 2 kind of surprises. Rest of it, not really anything surprising, but let's start with the NLCS. Again, I said the Mets are going to be an NLDS exit. I have the Mets winning the East. The Central goes to the Cardinals, and the West goes to the Padres, because I think the Dodgers have some holes on their roster for the first time in many years, especially middle infield with Gavin Lux's injury. As for the wild cards, Braves are going to get in. I mentioned the Cubs and the Dodgers. That's going to be your 6-team field. My surprise is that the Phillies missed the postseason. I think Philadelphia is going to come up just short this year on making the playoffs. It's going to be a duel between them and the Braves. I think the Mets are going to win the East, and I think it's going to lull people into a false sense of security, and then they're going to fall apart in a playoff series in October. I think that's a completely realistic possibility. So this is how it's all going to shake out. You get down to it, and the NLCS for me, I've got San Diego making it to the NLCS, and the Padres are going to face the St. Louis Cardinals. I think all of the young talent for the Cardinals, Wainwright's going to have enough in the tank once he comes back from injury for one last good push with this team. And I think St. Louis and San Diego make it to the NLCS. AL side, I think it's going to be another rematch. I think it's going to be a very predictable year at the top of the AL. I've got the Yankees winning the East. Central's going to go to the Guardians again, and the West is going to go to the Astros. The wild card spots, I've got Boston making the field. I've got the Angels making the field and Seattle making the field. I think Tampa misses it this year. Toronto again comes up short. So that's my 6 for the AL. And then the ALCS, Astros over the Yankees. And as I said, NLCS, Padres and Cardinals. I've got San Diego over St. Louis. So same World Series matchup as Raheel, but different result. Padres get it. And San Diego kind of upsets Houston, and the Padres, finally it works for AJ Preller. They win the World Series in 7 games over the Houston Astros. So, Tim, I'll go to you next for your picks.
Well, starting on the NL side, I guess I'll go with overall the NL East, which I think is going to be the biggest and hardest one to debunk. I'm going to go with the Philadelphia Phillies winning the National League East. I just think they're going to end up surprising the teams a little bit more, even despite the struggles. They're still going to be relatively healthy when you get to the big portions of the season. Of course, I know no Harper to start out the year, but again, when you bring in a guy like Trey Turner, who of course right now is currently America's hero, needless to say, I think that he's going to really, really push this team forward. So I'm eager to see what Philadelphia is going to do this year. I think the Braves are going to be a wild card team. The Mets are going to be a wild card team. And I think the Braves too, they're going to be very competitive. They're going to be, within a game and a half of winning the NL East. The Mets right there within, I'd say, 2 or 3 games. I think the Marlins are also going to be a little bit better this year. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs though. But the Washington Nationals are the Nationals. I don't think they're going to do anything special. So of course, 3 playoff teams overall on the NL East side. Going into the Central, this is where I'll have 2 playoff teams coming from as well. I think that you're going to have the Cardinals winning the NL Central, or excuse me, I'm not going to have 2 playoff teams coming from the Central, 2 playoff teams coming from the West, but I'll have the Cardinals winning the Central. I think the Cubs, you mentioned the underdog of the Cubs, Eddie. I think they're going to be a lot better. I just don't think yet they're ready to be a playoff team. I think they still have a little bit of ways to go. On the West side, I'm going to have the Padres, who are my favorite to make the World Series. They'll end up winning the West, and the Dodgers end up coming with the wild card. On the American League side, of course, I have the Yankees winning the American League East. I think Boston this year, to be honest with you, they're my biggest underdog in the American League. Last year, can't forget, I had them winning the World Series, so that didn't go right. But I think they could be a little bit on a little bit of an incline this year. Justin Turner, hope everything for him goes nice and that he's able to come back nice and healthy. I think that Boston team's definitely made a couple good moves to make them a playoff possibility in a wild card spot. And I think the Rays are a consistent, stay in the playoffs. So I think you're going to see them there. Baltimore, I don't really know how to feel about. I really felt they could have done more this offseason. I think they're going to play 500 baseball, but I just don't think it's going to be enough, to be truthfully honest with you, for them to make the playoffs. I think the Guardians are going to win the Central on the AL Central side. And on the AL West side, I feel like it's a little bit interesting because the Astros are going to win. They're going to dominate. But, man, I don't know. Like, Texas is giving me a very good vibe this year, the Rangers, in regards to what they possibly can do. Of course, you mentioned Ohtani on a playoff, or I say playoff year, but wanting to make the playoffs on a contract year would be huge, but it's the Angels, man. I just don't think I could bank on them making anything. So I truly don't know, to be honest with you, on that AL West side, what would be the team that surprises. It could be the A's. You never know. Also, I don't really think the Twins are really going to be playoff caliber as much as what they could have been last season. So I really think the surprise team could be the Rangers this year, just because of the fact that I still feel that AL West is relatively weak. And if you want to move forward to my NLCS predictions, I have the Philadelphia Phillies falling to the San Diego Padres. I think the Padres are going to go on to the World Series, and they'll end up taking on, as I kind of pre-mentioned before, the Houston Astros. The Astros will sweep the Yankees in 4 games, just like last season. And then in 6 games, I have the San Diego Padres ending up ending the dry spell and winning a World Series that city is definitely desired for a while now, over the Astros in 6 games.
All right, well, Zoe, me, Tim, and Raheel all have the exact same World Series matchup with different results. So take us through what you have for your predictions.
Okay, so if I'm looking at everyone again, I mean, it's tough because obviously there's some teams that you look at, right? Like the Cubs could be good, but will they really be? I mean, Dansby Swanson's great. So, like, I agree with you on the side that the Cubs could really, like, be a dark horse and they could come through. I also, like, because I'm going to be in Chicago, I'm going to be going to a lot of Cub games. So I feel like because of that, I'm going to want to root for them. So part of me, like, just wants to say, like, I want to see the Cubs do well. And since, like, the World Series and everything. And even though he played on the Braves, I just find myself being a Dansby Swanson fan. So I think they'd be fun to see. As for everyone else, I think the Padres, I agree on that side, will be really scary. I think someone in the NL that I think could really, really step up would be the Diamondbacks. I think if they were to spend a little bit more money and if prospects like Corbin Carroll and people that they bring up have as big a year as people are projecting them to have, I think the Diamondbacks could really cause some havoc there. I mean, there's only so much you can do in a division where you have both the Dodgers, the Padres, and then you also have the Giants, who always have the capability to like make a run. So I think that makes it hard. But then you have the Rockies, who are someone that's never going to come close. So that might help for the Diamondbacks. But I think it honestly depends on how much money they decide to put into that team. For on that side, on the NL side, I have Dodgers versus Phillies. I know you counted the Phillies out, but for me, I think Trey Turner can lead a team, and I don't know. For me, like the Phillies have all the pieces when I look at it. So I see the Phillies coming back strong. I didn't expect them at all last year to do what they did, and they blew me out of the water with that. So I don't see any reason why they should fall off in terms of that. Sure, maybe they'll have a slow start, but I think they're going to get back up there. They're going to ramp it up. And obviously in the NL East, like I think they have a real chance to win it because the Braves obviously have lost some pieces and the Braves are still going to be competitive. I'm not saying they're not going to be, but the Mets have lost some and the Braves have lost some. And so I feel this gives the Phillies a perfect opportunity of chance to step up. If they can be consistent and win games, I think they're totally going to get there. So I have them versus the Dodgers in the NLCS because part of me wanted to put the Padres in, but the Dodgers are just so good. And for me, like I know the Padres have these pieces, but we haven't really seen them click. And Tatis is kind of a mess. Like, we don't know when he's going to play. When he does play, we don't know how he's going to play. And the whole thing, he's been out of baseball for a really long time now. I'm very back and forth on how the Padres are going to work out. And maybe next season I see them being really good, but this season I think they're going to need to gel a little bit, and I don't know if that's going to happen in time for them to really make a run. So I got the Dodgers versus the Phillies, and I have the Phillies going to the World Series. I even have the Phillies winning the World Series. I think this is a revenge year. I think you're going to see the same matchup, Astros versus Phillies. I think it's going to take 6 games, and I think the Phillies are going to come up on top. We saw them play some great baseball in the postseason last year, and someone's got to dethrone the Astros. Like, it's got to happen at some point. So I think that's a good contender to do it. And my surprise pick, as I was saying before, I have the Red Sox going to the ALCS. And I think the Red Sox will come up and be a really good team this year. I know Tim talked about it a little bit last year. And especially if you take a team like the Yankees, right, who didn't improve much on offense or has some things. And I told you I'm not the highest up on Aaron Judge. I think there's a real chance that the Red Sox could step up and pull something there. And so for me in the AL, I have the Red Sox versus the Astros. I think the Astros will probably beat the Red Sox like pretty easily. But I don't think it'll be a sweep. Probably take like 4 or 5 games. And then the Astros advance to the World Series and lose to the Phillies. So those are my picks for the year.
So we've all got the Astros in the World Series. We'll await Hayley's picks. And again, we'll have everybody's thrown together on a super silly graphic that I will be posting in a few days' time. But got a few more minutes. Zoe, one last thing I got to get you, since you're the Northwestern fan here. March Madness for Boo Booey and the Wildcats is in the books. You guys won a game for like the second time ever. So that's something.
We've actually won the first round game every time we've been in March Madness, which has only been twice. But we've won the game both times we've been in it. So that feels like a kind of record.
It does. It does. You did lose to UCLA, but as you were telling me off the air, it does make you feel a little better than you were not the team that would lose in some crazy way to Gonzaga.
That's true. And I also think, honestly, I don't feel bad about that UCLA game because Northwestern came pretty close. Like, I expected to go into that game. Like, I didn't want to watch that game. I remember texting my friends before and I was like, this is going to be a bloodbath. Like, I, in one of my brackets, had Northwestern losing to Boise State. Like, I wasn't even sure they were going to make it past the first round. So once they played UCLA, Northwestern they have the power to be really good, but they're not always consistent. And that's my fear with them. However, they came very close to beating UCLA. They made UCLA sweat a little bit, and that made me feel good. So I think they definitely are a better basketball team than a lot of people thought they were. And they were definitely somewhat of a dark horse in the tournament. And I think they definitely proved that. I do think they would have lost to Gonzaga, but I think it would have been a really good matchup to see someone. I mean, obviously Chase Audige was, the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, and you have someone like Boo Booey on offense. And I think seeing the Wildcats defense go up against Gonzaga's offense would have been really fun. But overall, I'm very, very glad that Northwestern didn't have to play them on the national scale. Yes.
You did go further than Rutgers, though. We did get a win
That's
over
true.
you guys. So
you guys did. You guys did.
We did. So, but again, the Big Ten sucks in the tournament. So, they're all out.
So
the top,
bad.
There were 15 teams standing at one point last night, and none of them were Big Ten teams after Michigan State lost. It's very unfortunate. But we'll see what happens. Major League Baseball. Going to be a fun season starting up in just a few days' time. And we will have our picks again for you on Twitter at SportsSpeak Live on opening day. But we appreciate Zoe joining us. And let's move into our next segment now. Part 2, Hayley Galindo is going to be joining us to talk World Baseball Classic and a little more about the MLB.
And we welcome you back to episode 129 here on SportsSpeak. I'm Tim Moore alongside Eddie Kalegi and Hayley Galindo joining us here on SportsSpeak. Hayley, it's about to get fiery, of course.
For sure.
We're on episode 129. The World Baseball Classic, it, in my opinion, was a classic this year. Eddie, of course, you said you've been waiting a little bit for this discussion to happen because you highly agree. Maybe that has a little bit to do with the fact that you are a New York Mets fan and Edwin Diaz got hurt. However, needless to say, Team US coming short to Japan in the World Baseball Classic this year. But Hayley, I want to start with you. Of course, I'm going to do a little bit of mediating in this situation. It's a scenario, in my opinion, for the World Baseball Classic where, of course, the best of the athletes in the world can't compete in the Olympics. So hence why I feel the World Baseball Classic is so important. But I want to get your perspective first before we start this argument, because to me, the World Baseball Classic means so much from an aspect of, representing your heritage, representing, where you come from as an individual. In your perspective, there's a lot of people not really, into the aspect of what this whole World Baseball Classic represents. Is it fair to say that despite all the professional risks the World Baseball Classic has created, especially this year in terms of outcome, it is still single-handedly the most important baseball event there is outside of the World Series?
Yeah, and I'm assuming you mean risks as in injuries, but I think people talk about that. That's just baseball. It's inevitable. It's just like in every sport. Baseball, there's going to be injuries. And I know we have a Mets fan here, and Edwin Diaz, I mean, that hurt me too. I'm Puerto Rican. I felt like I couldn't even celebrate after that win. But like you were saying, it just brings a sense of pride to players. And we get this every 4 years. And there were some players from the Dominican Republic team that were saying this win meant more for them than winning the World Series. I mean, it goes beyond baseball, and it's something that we don't see. So yeah, it's so important. And I think, honestly, I would argue that I've had more fun watching the World Baseball Classic than I've had the regular season gets boring sometimes. I mean, let's be honest, sometimes it drags. It's a long season. So when we get something new like the World Baseball Classic, and it's huge, I mean, this is what we needed. This is what baseball needed. And that's been said so many times, but it's so true. I mean, I think this is how you wanted to start the regular season. I mean, this is how you go into it.
Now, I'm going to go to the contrary to you, Eddie, real quick before you give your input, because my question to you is, of course, the one downfall of the World Baseball Classic is that it functions slightly off of different rules, not exactly up to date with Major League Baseball's current rules in terms of how it all functions. And you mentioned, obviously, your aspect of the risk of baseball and what you worry about in the aspect of injury. But to be honest with you, in terms of the American game, of course, you see what happened with Trey Turner. I feel there's a little bit of worry in Major League Baseball today with all the pitch clock and everything that you don't really have that time to let the game breathe and get that Game 7 moment as much as what you will in the past, but it's still going to be exciting nonetheless. So in terms of the World Baseball Classic, you talked about how you don't exactly like it as much in terms of it's just not good for the game in general, and because of the risks that oversees everything else. But shouldn't you also feel, in my opinion, that those moments and people wanting to represent their country should be different from the game of baseball itself and what we're seeing in Major League Baseball?
Listen, I'm not trying to take that away, and I'm going to start with the positives. That's what I did on my show at Rutgers earlier this week as well. The positives, number one, is the way it ended. Trout versus Ohtani. Neither of them have gotten any Major League Baseball playoff experience. Trout's played one baseball playoff series. The Angels have been a disaster, even though they've had two of the best stars. That was a great moment, and getting to see players represent their country. And the fact that, once again, kind of going off of Hayley's point, that she said she found this more fun than watching a regular season game. A lot of people, especially in the younger demographics, agree with that. And the viewership proves it. I mean, that Japan-Korea game was like the most watched baseball game ever. And you had social media engagement through the roof. So my opinion is this: the event, and I said this earlier, this event can happen. This event has to change. It cannot be played right before the Major League Baseball season, because then you have these injuries. And I'm not going to say just because I'm a Mets fan and I'm salty that Edwin Diaz got hurt. There's more than that. Hayley, you are from the great state of Texas. Jose Altuve is also out for the first couple months.
Don't care about that.
I know you don't. I know you don't care. I'm just acknowledging that. Also, go ahead. Okay,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Hayley.
Okay, so you had mentioned the injuries. Well, how ironic that Brandon Nimmo came out and said he wasn't going to play in the World Baseball Classic because he didn't want to get injured, and he gets injured in spring training on a slide to second base.
That's a Mets moment. That is a moment.
Yeah, that's why I said you're a Mets fan. You should be used to the Edwin Diaz thing.
That only happens to the New York Mets. And there are other injuries too to talk about, and I think there are going to be more. This is my problem, and what Tim brought up is a great point. The World Baseball Classic was conducted under different rules from Major League Baseball, which I don't really understand, because the Major League Baseball is essentially what operates the WBC. It is not smart for these pitchers. We have seen throughout recent years how fragile Major League players, especially pitchers, are. They need that time to get their reps in, get warmed up, and get ramped up for the season. Being thrown into a situation, and ask any pitcher, pitching in a spring training game versus a playoff game, completely different environment, completely different mechanics, completely different approach. You have guys that are not prepared to have to play in these types of games until October, being forced to play in these in March. And then what happens is they'll come back to camp and they'll be like, oh, I got a bad shoulder, a bad arm or something, and then they're going to be banged up. Perfect example, Adam Wainwright, 41 years old, goes over, has a pretty solid World Baseball Classic for America. And what happens? He hurts himself in the weight room. His arm was probably worn down from pitching and being misused by Mark DeRosa, which is another contention I'll get to in a few minutes. And now the Cardinals lose their ace for the start of the season. So I'm not saying these guys shouldn't be allowed to compete for their countries, because clearly, as I've seen during this particular iteration of the tournament, the players want to play in this. And like Hayley mentioned, these players are saying it means a lot to them. And if it does, that's great. I'm not going to argue against that. But play it in the fall, because then those injuries aren't going to carry over and influence as much of the regular season. And again, the MLB runs the WBC, hence why the championship games in America, hence why Rob Manfred is standing there handing out medals to Lars Nootbaar and Shohei Ohtani after the game. You want to use the WBC to market your major league product. But now the Major League Baseball in the regular season, you have already 3 big-time players on 3 of the, let's say, 8 to 10 teams that could legitimately contend for a World Series this year, that are now going to miss significant time, or in Diaz's case, the entire season, where if this game was played in the fall, Diaz would have missed probably the first half of the year if he suffered the injury, and Altuve and Wainwright would have missed no time at all. So that's my contention.
But let me ask you this then. When is an appropriate time for the World Baseball Classic? Because baseball's not willing, but it's not willing to, of course, cut its season short, or put a stoppage in the middle of the season during the summertime. For example, the Olympics this past, few years, where they're not willing to stop the season, right, for you to play. They're not willing to cut the season short or to let you play. So baseball players still need time to get their bodies right and take time off. So I get your point of doing it in November, right? But you've just went through the entire wear and tear of the season. And let's say if you do it late November, of course, the threat of the World Series may be carrying over early November. But is that really fair enough, appropriate enough time to get it done? I feel like, to be honest with you, if you're going to get it done early, maybe December, January. But I personally feel the biggest discussion Major League Baseball needs to have with itself is the only true answer solving the, well, I shouldn't even say the injury woes, because injuries are going to happen regardless. But I feel the only true way you can do it is working a system that you can shorten your baseball seasons on the year's World Baseball Classic happens. And I think that's the only fair way you can institute rest in an appropriate manner for these Major League Baseball players. Maybe you disagree with me, Eddie, but
I don't disagree. I mean, I think in general, baseball needs to shorten its regular season. I think 162 games is too much, and I think we can all agree on that. But I think Major League Baseball has to be willing to make some concessions and make this thing work, because I'll say it again, people don't realize it enough. Major League Baseball is what funds the World Baseball Classic. That is why all of the uniforms are in English. That's why the predominant telecasts are done by Fox Sports. It is an American-based thing. So, Major League Baseball has to find a way to make it work for their sport, which has struggled in many ways. And the WBC can aid that, but making it a way where you have guys getting injured beforehand is a problem. But I'm going to leave that point. I think there's other prongs to this that I think me and Hayley are going to have to debate here. Another problem that I have with the WBC is that they try too hard to level the playing field. And what I mean by that is this. Players should have to play for the country they are from. I'm not going to contend as much with, listen, America, Japan have the two of the predominant systems. And of course, several countries in Latin America have serious leagues. If European teams can't field a team without having players that are not from the country, I'm sorry, they should not be in the WBC if baseball is not a thing. People in England are not walking around eating fish and chips in Manchester thinking about how Trace Thompson is an elite center field. But guess what? Trace Thompson, the same Trace Thompson who is the brother of Klay Thompson, one of the Splash Brothers for the Golden State Warriors, is suddenly saying top of the morning and playing center field for Great Britain. And I mean, Hayley, Puerto Rico, one of your pitchers was Marcus Stroman, who last time this tournament happened, he was pitching for America. Like I feel like there's too much of America kind of trying to spread its wings a bit by allowing players to play for other teams to level the playing field, when in reality, the only teams that can truly compete in this are America, Japan, and about 4 or 5 federations from Latin America. Puerto Rico's one, Venezuela, Dominican Republic, and Cuba. That is about it. So like, and Mexico as well. But these extra teams, I'm sorry, the Czech Republic should not be fielding
them alone, Eddie. Leave them alone.
They have high school teachers playing in their infield.
Hey, but they have a win under their belt.
I just want to point out, nobody did any worse than what was it, China, right? This year, China allowed, what is it, like 50 runs over the 4-game stretch?
Great Britain also got rocked. So I don't see a problem with that. I don't see an issue with players choosing to, I mean, I knew you were going to bring up Stroman. That one I was just waiting for, but I don't see an issue with it, honestly. I saw one person, it was from, I don't even know what team they're on, but he wasn't even of, he said that he was on the team because his wife was Jewish, something like that. And okay, sure, whatever. But I mean, just let them play. Again, this happens every 4 years. And I mean, I think it's cool that there's people who they're not major league players, they're high school teachers, they're welders, they're dads. I think that's cool. And that's something that I think I want to see.
Now, but see, Eddie brings up a good point, though, that I also want to point out, because you make identity subjective. I'm not trying to get political by it, but Hayley, I guess my question for you is, do you see that maybe concerning down the road, considering, for example, you mentioned Stroman being able to switch? To me, that can make, hey, I can turn around, let's say I marry somebody that is, well, granted, of course, I'm not playing the World Baseball Classic, but let's say I marry, somebody that's from Japan. All of a sudden, now I can play for the Japanese baseball team. That to me is a little bit ridiculous in that extent.
Because yeah, I agree. When I saw that video, I was a little thrown off a little bit. But I mean, again, I think this whole entire tournament just brings it brings a sense of pride to players. So if that's what you want to represent and you're prideful about that country, then so be it. I mean,
objective. That is more of my question towards it. How do you avoid people identifying with certain countries they may not actually be truly identifying with, and not allowing it to not be subjective, so that it is a true representation as much as possible?
I feel like that's something that they might try to fix in the next classic, which is in 2026. Because I do see that being an issue. I really do. And I feel like that's something that they might try to bring up. Honestly, I feel like the World Baseball Classic should kind of have the same rules with the rules should be similar to the Olympics, in the sense that, what country you represent, so that there's not those kind of like mix-ups.
Yeah, because I just think this should be an assessment of which country has the best baseball program. And this could be huge. Like, America, they see it as their national pastime. Well, I can't call it the national pastime when you're 1 for 5 in this thing. But part of this is also because some of your players that you could have are just playing for other teams, even though they're from America.
Well, also, I would argue that there's a lot of players in, like, some of our best players who weren't playing. I mean, a lot of the Yankees, I'm a huge Yankee fan, but we already know where the Yankees stand with the World Baseball Classic. I mean, they're not going to have Aaron Judge out there or Garrett Cole. They're not going to put their ace starters out there because of injuries, which goes back to what you guys are saying. And I mean, it's hard because you want to put your best out there, but I feel like every other country was doing that but America.
Well, and to your point as well, Haley, I feel like that, granted, because we missed a World Baseball Classic technically because of the pandemic, you know,
Right.
trying to let things catch up. But my thing is more of too is that I actually hope genuinely that it does adapt to guys like Aaron Judge. Of course, we saw Mike Trout finally getting to play a big game because you have the All-Star game, but let's be honest, MLB's All-Star game means nothing today as what compared to it used to be in terms of battling for home field advantage in the World Series, you know, and having its little bit of stipulation and iconic moments. You know, this is the closest, in my opinion, you'll get to an All-Star game. And for me in particular, looking at teams, you know, in Latin America, this to them is equivalent to a World Series because, minor league systems, you have everything, but this is their best way of representation, making representation as a whole, you know, and representing the clubs and organizations they have. And to be honest with you, of course, baseball, the last time in the Olympics, finally got represented after years. But to me, it doesn't really do its justice because, again, it happens in the middle of the baseball season, which is why I just still push for the fact that the World Baseball Classic has to be the best of the best in the world, and it has to happen during the time it's happening, just so the best players can happen. But I just want to bring it back to you, Eddie, for one more thing as well, because obviously Haley mentioned, right, the aspect of, you have some of your biggest stars missing out, but how do you work that in so that maybe some of these players are maybe more incentivized, considering it's controlled by Major League Baseball, to want to participate in something as big it is? Because from a viewership perspective, the World Baseball Classic, in my opinion, was a massive, massive perk, you know, for the sport of baseball in general, let alone Major League Baseball. To me, if MLB can maybe incentivize these players further to not just worry about their contracts and maybe have connections with teams so that there's a little bit less of a worry, don't you think maybe that would also maybe put a little bit more of a perk and a benefit for players focusing on wanting to be a part of the World Baseball Classic and representing their country?
Well, and I think that's going to be a problem for American players going forwards. The predominant solution is moving it. I think that helps, number one, because obviously with the Yankees, I mean, Brian Cashman and the higher ups in the Yankees organization, there was a reason that Aaron Judge and Garrett Cole and Giancarlo Stanton were not out there for Team USA. So
the field was, though. Can't forget about that.
Well,
Higgy.
Okay, but Higgy barely played, and Higgy is not a important piece for the Yankees moving forward. If Aaron Hicks was selected,
he's a good catcher, Eddie.
He's the backup. Listen, if Aaron Hicks was asked to go play for Team USA, do you think Brian Cashman would be stopping him? Like, listen, it's the people that you pay big money for, and that's the problem here. Because the reason I can't equivocate the World Baseball Classic with the World Cup for soccer is a completely different dynamic. Soccer is truly a global game. Baseball is working towards that. It is not there quite yet. Soccer has incredible leagues across Europe. It's building its presence in America and Mexico, Asia, Australia. The sport is truly worldwide, and you have great leagues all over the place. And of course, the World Cup is already built in. The WBC has only existed since 2006. They're playing from behind the 8 ball already because America has dominated baseball for such a long time. And the Americans are far less incentivized to go play in this than someone, say, from a Latin American country who came from nothing and then ended up making it to the major leagues and now want to give back to their country. So America as a team is going to have a problem going forwards. And I don't really have an exact answer to your question, Tim, for how they can incentivize it better to make American players want to play. But I can call out what some of the other things that need to be focused on here. And what the overall, I think, overarching problem is at this point, America is just still so far ahead of the other countries in terms of its baseball, all the way from the beginning, from the Little League system. There are many reasons for that, but that's just the way it is. And still, when you get to the high level, the star players from other countries come over and play in America, and that's kind of what happens. So, like I said, they are the ones who are motivated to want to play and represent the country that they came from. The American players who are already here and found a way, they don't feel that same type of lineage. So that's a problem. And then my last problem I kind of want to bring up to Haley is another worry that comes because of the injuries is who the managers are of some of these teams, because they appoint people that are sort of, respected in the world of baseball, but don't really have managerial expertise. And the prime example here is Team USA. For several World Baseball Classics, they had Jim Leland, who used to be the manager of the Tigers and had been to the World Series before and won one with the Marlins. This time around, they got someone with no managerial experience whatsoever, Mark DeRosa, who works on MLB Network and just talks about the Yankees and Braves all the time. And wasn't even.
I disagree with that. And you also have Andy Pettitte and Ken Griffey Jr. I think that's a pretty good lineup right there. I think that's a good team.
Well, they're good players. They know what they're doing, but I don't trust Mark DeRosa in terms of decision making. And if I was a team, I would have kept my player out when I realized this guy does not know how to manage a pitching staff because he's never worked as a coach before at any level, probably besides like the Little League. He retired and he started working on MLB Network. I mean, there are people like Joe Girardi and Joe Maddon. Say what you want about their Major League Baseball managing abilities, but at least they know how to manage a staff and work with a pitcher. And I think there were teams that were worried. Of course, the predominant reason Team USA lost, in my opinion, I know their offense only put up 2 runs against Japan in the championship, but overall in the tournament, they didn't have much pitching besides Wainwright. They had Merrill Kelly and Kyle Freeland. So many elite pitchers did not go. And one of the big reasons, I think, is because you didn't have an experienced manager. You had someone who, frankly, has no clue what he's doing when it comes to managing a pitching staff. And for a team, again, that has an investment of millions of dollars in this asset, in this pitcher, they don't want to cough that up, and they don't trust someone managing them that doesn't know how to manage.
Okay, I don't agree with that. And also what I want to bring up is Yadier Molina. I mean, that was he was on the coaching staff too for us, and something about that just felt right. Mark DeRosa, he's an analyst on MLB Network. I mean, that's hard to do. And as an analyst, that's what you do, is you analyze these teams and you break them down and figure out, where can I put this person and this person? And I think the thing that I didn't like with Mark, I didn't have anything. I mean, I think that coaching staff was pretty good, but the only thing I just didn't like was him moving Trey Turner out of the 9-hole for that last game. But really quickly, you had said I think it was your second, I don't know, it was your second spot or your point. You had said that you think that America is more advanced when it comes to baseball. Yeah, I just don't agree with that. I mean, that was proven. I mean, I think we're good. And even if we didn't have, let's say we did have stars like Stanton and Judge, which, by the way, to answer your question, Tim, I think that Ohtani and Mike Trout playing this year in the World Baseball Classic, this being Mike Trout's first time, I think that's going to kickstart, and that's going to start something in 2026. I think that's going to call for the superstars to start playing, because, I mean, how are you going to see the last out of the World Baseball Classic was Ohtani pitching to Mike Trout? That's gonna, I mean, everyone was watching. You had all eyes on the TV at that point. And that's what I think. I mean, even this is kind of, off of what we're talking about, but even the followings on social media. I mean, Shohei Ohtani gaining a huge following. He's gaining so much popularity. I mean, he already has, and I think he deserves every inch of that. But even like Lars Nootbaar, who even is that person? I mean, that man's respected in Japan. Everyone loves him. There's just so many people, even some players from Mexico, that are getting the recognition that they deserve. And I think that that's awesome. And I think that is going to start bringing these superstars into this tournament. But to go back to the coaching staff, I mean, I think you're not giving enough credit, and I think you're kind of selling Mark short. I mean, yeah, he was a former ball player, but he's also on MLB Network, and he's an analyst. I mean, that's huge. This is what he does. That's his career, is being able to look at these teams and say, this is their weakness, this is their strength, and putting players out there. Sure, you make mistakes. I mean, managers do that all the time. We see it every single time in the regular season. Any game setting, managers are going to make mistakes. It's just because of their position that they're held at a higher standard. But I mean, even if it was Joe Girardi or anyone managing the team, I don't think that would have mattered.
I still think I don't think it would have mattered for as much for their performance. I think it would have mattered, though, for some of these other players coming over. And that's why I say America still has the best system, but they didn't have the best assets out there because half their best players chose not to participate. But I do agree with your one point.
Well, is that a good system?
What?
Is that a good system?
I don't know if that's a good system necessarily, but that's because Major League
I don't
Baseball,
think it
Major
is.
League Baseball is $1 billion business. That's why that's the overrunning system. And again, that's the conflicts of interest that exist because the WBC and the MLB are run by the same people. But my one thing I will say is 3 years from now, I agree with you 100%. After the athletes saw Trout and Ohtani and how exciting that was, and someone like Lars Nootbaar, by the way, not from Japan, but still he's hailed as a hero by Japan now and by the Cardinals fans because of his performance. We're going to see more players motivated to participate in this. And I have no problem with that. I just think it needs to be moved because it cannot be happening in the middle of interrupting spring training when a team is trying to build chemistry and a player is trying to ramp up and they are not used to pitching in these types of games in March, and an injury in March can impact their team that has invested millions of dollars in them. That's my only point I'm trying to make here. I think the event should happen. I think it's a great event. A great story here, for example, is that guy Duque Ebert, who struck out the side of 3 major leaguers and then got a minor league contract with the Detroit Tigers later that day. Those are the types of stories that I love from the WBC. And I do like it. And obviously we have seen from this year that this event should still happen because people will watch, and especially young people will watch. And that's exactly what Major League Baseball needs, but it can't be happening in the month of March. That's basically what I'm ending with.
Who's with me?
How much time do we have left?
We got 10 minutes, so.
Okay, because I just want to ask one more question to both you guys, because obviously you guys are talking about adaptability and so on in regards to America in general. But my question is obviously based upon what we've seen from the Baseball Classic this year. And of course, change has to be made. But do you guys feel there's any specific changes in terms of maybe pool play or how the format works should ultimately change to maybe make it a little bit easier transition to get these superstars involved? Because I feel like there's a lot of good teams that miss out, in terms of certain pools of, making the final 8 because they're all bunched together. I feel like it should be spread out a little bit as compared to region, but maybe that's just me.
Well, I'll start. I feel like there should be more Latin American countries that make it. And again, Europe has no basis for baseball whatsoever. I know Hayley loves the Czech Republic teachers, and that's cool and everything, but still,
right there.
Should
there be more, by the way, Eddie, because that's the thing. 4 games, you have a 5-way tie in one of the pools. That to me is absolutely ridiculous. I think it was Pool A, right?
Yeah, and again, that's what happens when you try to fit this into a 2-week window in the middle of spring training. If you did this later in the year, you don't have to change where you play. It is warm in Japan and you can play indoors. You can play indoors in Miami and Arizona still. The locations where you play do not change. You could stretch this out a little more. I think there should be more opportunities for teams from South America and Latin America to make it into the field. And yes, I think pool play should be stretched out to more than 4 games because, again, baseball, everywhere else that it's played, it's long seasons. We all agree it's too long, but baseball is all about several games. I mean, in the majors, World Series, you crown a champion on a best of 7 situation. I think it should be single elimination once you get out of pool play, and that should stay, but I think pool play should be at least 6 games.
I honestly agree. I think that the pool was a little bit confusing, especially after that game versus USA and Venezuela. That was such a big game. And then you get into the semifinal and it's like, oh my God, who's USA going to play? And it's Cuba. And it's like, why are we playing Cuba? Well, look at who Cuba faced. They faced Australia. And it's like that pool. I mean, there's no competition there. I mean, we ended up beating them. I didn't even know what the score was, but it was not a pretty game. I think that the pools are confusing and that should definitely be fixed.
Yeah. I mean, I agree in regards to be fixed. And so how do you fix it? Also, my question, because obviously Eddie, you mentioned wanting to bring in more Latin American teams, but it's like, how do you fix it bringing in more teams, considering it's already confusing as it is? And let's say that MLB chooses to not expand it to further, more countries having the opportunity to play in the WBC, because it's, like I said, it's already a confusing format that sets 8 teams to, set themselves up for a chance to battle for a championship. But if you add more, I mean, then there's the chaos of, say, you have 10 or 12 teams, maybe even 14 teams, which means you would have to add, oh gosh, I can't even do the math of how many more teams you would have to add. But the point is, like, how does Major League Baseball maybe approach getting all these more teams, because again, we're talking about US in particular and all these teams, not wanting to have certain superstars participate at the moment because of the fact they're worrying about injury. Now you're potentially adding more games and more, opportunities to get hurt. Doesn't that kind of contradict it a little bit?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think what would be a dream system, I don't really know how possible it is because, again, a lot of the countries that participate in this do not have the same infrastructure as America and Japan and wouldn't be able to host this. So I really wish, because there was so much travel involved in this, I almost wish it kind of alternated between different countries that hosted the event and you could bring all the teams to one place. Of course, soccer lends itself to being able to have more games in one day because baseball games go 3 hours. And if they're not having the pitch clock here, they will indeed go 3 hours. But I feel like there should be less travel involved. Let's say hypothetically 2026, you have a qualification period. I don't know exactly what you'd put in, but I think there should be some stipulation. I mean, there should be fewer spots coming from Europe. There is less baseball played professionally there than there is in Latin America. There should be more spots for teams from Latin America and South America, and then fill in the bracket and have one host country. Probably going to be either the US or Japan, maybe Mexico, but that's probably going to be one of those two. Let's say it was in the US. You have all of the Southern California ballparks. You have Arizona. You have Miami. You have Tampa Bay. You have 8 good climate controlled places you could play games. And then you could add some pool play. And I think that would be the best way it would work. We only have a couple minutes left. So Hayley, since you're the guest, I'll give you the last word on the WBC.
I completely agree with what you said, Eddie. I would love to see more Latin American countries. I mean, look, I'm not trying to be mean. What is Great Britain doing? First of all, their jerseys were awful. And why were they?
The letters were falling off of their
jerseys. Going on Word document, typing in Great Britain and putting it splat on a jersey. I mean, horrible. That was so awful.
Britain's more of a cricket. That's the big thing. They're more involved in cricket, not baseball.
Then stick to cricket. Then stick to cricket and don't be playing Trace Thompson on your team.
But it's baseball at the end of the day. You get what I'm saying in terms of who is eligible and who's not. And to me, that's more of an MLB decision. Wouldn't it be that case?
Right. Leave it in Rob's hands. Leave it in his hands.
Yeah. Leave it up to Rob. He knows what he's doing. But only got another minute. That was a passionate debate, but we had our baseball preview earlier in the episode. We'll get Hayley's picks on everything that we'll post on Thursday with everybody else. But I'll just finish with this. You are a Yankees fan, even though you're a little disappointed that Aaron and co did not participate in the WBC. But what are your expectations for them heading into the season?
I'm honestly, look, if we're going off spring training, I'm not very hopeful. I mean, I'm tired of watching them lose in spring training, but I'm looking forward to this upcoming season. I'm interested to see, what's going to happen and how this is going to play out. I think some of the cards we're dealt with right now, it doesn't look to be that good, but the Yankees have proved me wrong before. So, hopefully we get into this regular season and we kick it off better than spring training, because if we're basing this off of spring training, I'm not looking forward to this season at all.
Do you see the ALCS? Because almost all of us see the Yankees losing to the Astros in 4 games yet again, the ALCS.
I live in Texas. Just the Astros name, oh my, I mean, don't tell me that. I don't want to think of that. I don't want to think about the Yankees losing to the Astros. I mean, that's how many times have we seen that play out?
But
no, I don't know.
Yankees not different this year. It just isn't. No. Even with Volpe and everything, it's still the same problem.
And that's so frustrating. That is so frustrating to me. And I was just having this conversation, but I see them beating the Astros. Let that be known. I see them beating the Astros. And
you're the only one. So we all have the Astros in the world.
Y'all are all Yankee haters except for Tim. Tim, I think you're on my side with this one. Tim, what did you say?
I want us to beat the Astros, but I had no Brian Cashman. So
it's going to be a fun season, and the WBC was a good preview for what should be a fun year of Major League Baseball. But we appreciate Hayley Galindo joining us. Reminder, next week, Jordan Sarnoff, the SID from Fairleigh Dickinson, who went viral, will be joining us. He went to camp with me and Tim a few years ago, so that'll be fun. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off of Sports Speak. Enjoy the weekend and stay tuned for opening day.